The present passage we're going to discuss is about the United States intervention in World War II. All right, a moderate to difficult passage. The passage you had to make sure that you read the answers options carefully and mark. Then it would be easy. But if this is the last of the passages you're doing, you're in a hurry to finish parajumbles and summary coming after that, then you're likely to make a lot of mistakes here. So be careful. When a passage has a lot of facts and a lot of words, terms, this, not this, you have to have a clear idea what's the author saying. Understand the main point properly. Second, when there are direct questions, do go back to the part of the passage from which the question has been asked and make sure that the answer option that you think is right is actually right or not. So you would be spending some extra time for each of the options. All right. Why did the United States? So the entire passage is talking about the Second World War and wars in general. The author says, why did the United States intervene in the Second World War? This question is rarely asked because the answer is obvious. Pearl Harbor, US was attacked first. To most Americans, there's a term he has used. World War II was a war of necessity. All right. Now, this is another term. He says wars can be wars of necessity or wars of choice. How does he define a war of choice? War of choice is something like Vietnam and the First World War. What is the First Gulf War? The American invasion of when Iraq invaded Kuwait, America started the First Gulf War. Because wars of choice are fought for reasons of principles, ideology, geopolitics, sometimes pure humanitarianism. So this is a war of choice. Remember, here the passage, you have to understand two terms. What's a war of necessity and what's a war of choice? War of choice involves your principles, your ideals, sometimes humanitarianism. On the other hand, war of necessity is a life or death struggle where the safety and security of a homeland, your nation's safety and security is at stake. And World War II, people called it a war of necessity. It is a quintessential war of necessity. That is why US joined World War II. Gulf War and the First Gulf War and Vietnam, those were wars of choice. They involved principles, ideals. They chose to get into the war. In the second one, it was necessary for you to get into the war to survive. Got it? All right. Next one. If World War II is remembered as the good war, the idea that it was necessary is a big part of the reason why. How do people remember World War II? As a good war. And according to the author, it was called a good war because it was necessary. All right? Because the enemies are wicked, Americans were attacked first, Japan attacked, right? Pearl Harbor started it. They had no choice but to fight. The perception of World War II has had a paradoxical effect on the broader American foreign policy debate. On the one hand, people who are anti-interventionist, means people who are against war, that you should not intervene, there should be no intervention on your part. They rightly perceive that the war's reputation as necessary and therefore good has encouraged America to believe that other wars are necessary and therefore good. People who are against war, who are against interventionism of any kind, are saying that the moment you say if it is necessary, it's a good war, it is encouraging this perception that any war that is necessary and therefore it is good. So a lot of other wars are being included in this necessary and therefore good category. And then he gives a line of wars which people have called good because of that reason. On the other hand, anti-interventionists are not alone in believing that even if World War II was necessary, the circumstances were unique and therefore irrelevant to subsequent foreign policy decision. From this sentence, what are you getting? That anti-interventionists also believe World War II is necessary. But this idea that it's necessary, therefore good, has made people justify other wars as necessary and good. That's what... No. All agree that World War II was necessary and therefore good. He says that World War II was unique, different. There's not going to be another Hitler. There's not going to be another situation where, there'd be a direct attack on the United States, like the kind that Japan did. World War II is very different from other wars. But the other wars, World War II was the only good foreign war that United States has ever fought. All other wars, according to the author, were not. Alright, but what if even America's intervention in World War II was not necessary, as most Americans would define the term? So most Americans would say World War II was necessary. But what if it wasn't necessary? The author is playing the devil's advocate. What if the situation is that it was not necessary? Then he is coming to the answer. What if a choice that America made based on the calculations not different from other wars, according to the author, World War II could also have been a war of choice, a choice that Americans made based on a lot of things that happened. Those many Americans who opposed American involvement in Europe and Asia in the 30s and 40s did not believe that war was necessary. So there were many Americans who did not believe World War II was necessary. In 1930s and 40s, they did not support America and they did not believe that the war was necessary. They knew about the risk posed by Hitler and the Japanese Empire. They knew about the attack on France, but they still thought that the war was not necessary. All right. They not only believed, but they also predicted that after England falls, France has fallen. If England falls, then America will be left with no allies. America will have not a single ally in the European theatre. Alright, this is the gist of the passage. Which of the following statements best captures the main argument of the last paragraph of the passage? Let's quickly look at the options and then look at the last paragraph. Britain, although fighting the war, was almost certain to lose it. Is this the main point? Although the threat from Hitler and Japanese Empire was well understood, many Americans still opposed America's involvement in World War II. World War II is the only war for which there is a broad consensus among Americans that war was necessary. Due to France's annexation and Britain's predicted fall, many Americans were in favor of military intervention. Let's look at the last paragraph before we decide which one is the right option. Okay. We'll just go back. Whose founders? We are talking of the First America Committee, a group of combined corporate elites who formed it. What did they believe? The First Committee people understood the implications of France's defeat. They not only believed but predicted Britain would be the next to fall, leaving the United States without a single meaningful ally in the European theatre. Now let's assume that the last paragraph extends to this also. Alright, because that's too short, so we assume it extends to this also. Here he says, many Americans opposed America's involvement in Europe and Asia in the 1930s and 40s. They didn't believe that the war was necessary. This is not because they were ignorant of the potential risks posed by Hitler and the Japanese Empire. In fact, the America First Committee not only knew the risks, they predicted it also. So based on this, we can say that many people in America, including the founders of the First Committee, believed were against American involvement in World War II, even though they knew the risks and they knew that Britain and France would eventually fall. So which one would best summarize this, captures the main argument? Not A, they knew, but that's not the main argument. Threat from Hitler and Japan was well understood. Many Americans still opposed. Yes, they anticipated the threat from Hitler and Japan, but they were still against it. They predicted the fall of Britain and France. They were still opposed to it. All right. World War II is the only war. It doesn't say anything among broad consensus. In fact, the last paragraph is talking about people who were opposed to World War II. Okay. Due to France's annexation, irrelevant. Therefore, answer is D. Yeah. Although they knew about Japan and Hitler and France and Britain losing eventually, they still were against the war. And this included people and those Chester Bowles and the Sears Reebok, all those people. All right, first committee, which consisted of corporate elite.